Hey, we're Bonnie and Greg Dixon for Health Pioneer Theater with our buddy Jerry Smith and our special guest. Jerry, can you introduce our guest here?
We're very delighted to have Mark Blumenthal with us tonight, and he's going to be giving us a tribute to two herbal pioneers. We've been on a theme lately on that, and it's an important one. You know, if you don't know American Botanical Council, ABC, you probably know Herbalgram magazine, the beautiful, amazingly thorough scientific journal on herbs and plants. And this was co-founded by Mark and others in 1988. And ever since then, we've had nothing but the best scientific support and exploration of herbs and our relationship to them. So I'd like to have Mark tell us about two pioneers tonight, and he'll give us some details we may not know. Before we do that, though, we're going to do a 5-minute clip from his interview, and we will send a link to that interview if you haven't had a chance to see it yet when we send this recorded version of this out. So please play that clip first.
And as Jim Duke used to be happy to say, and he would say it all the time, people did not co-evolve with synthetic pharmaceutical drugs. They've only been around for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years, depending on what the drug is. But people have co-evolved with the compounds found in medicinal plants. They've been part of our diet, they've been part of our medicine, depending on what continent you live in or came from, depending on what group of people you come from. But people have evolved using plants as medicine. And that connection with Jim Duke and Norman Farnsworth and Professor Tyler and Lewis and Bernard Erosian and so many other people fascinated not only myself, but a lot of other people. And the dialogue started happening. I was part of the center of some of that dialogue, but certainly it wasn't limited just to me. I loved communicating with these people. Matter of fact, Jim Duke, he used to send me stuff. He would have all this stuff photocopied, the stuff I didn't even ask for. Every month I got a big manila envelope with all kinds of photocopies of scientific papers, some of which I found interesting, some of which were just chemical analysis and chemical profiles of stuff which I did not find as much as interesting. I'm not a chemist. I'm more interested in ethnobotany and the clinical aspects of herbs. The cool thing about Jim Duke was he had franking privileges at USDA, which means as a government employee, he can send mail for free. He didn't have to buy stamps or run it through a postage meter. So in order to make sure that the mailing department wouldn't kick back all this stuff that he would send to me and presumably dozens of other people, because that's the way Jim was. Jim just loved to hand stuff out. He was very generous of heart and spirit, just constantly sharing. He would have it addressed to Dr. Mark Blumenthal. And I have no doctorate. I have no advanced degree. I quit college and finished in 68 and took a different turn, as I mentioned earlier. So Jim Duke was the first person to call me Dr. Blumenthal, but that was in order for the mail to get through for free at the taxpayer's expense. And he was seeding the herbal renaissance, a term that I borrow gratefully and respectfully from Dr. Paul Lee, who the aforementioned gentleman who started these string of 3 or 4 symposia in California back in the late 70s. The herbal renaissance. Jim Duke helped seed that herbal renaissance with all this scientific information that he would get from the U.S. government archives. So. I want to take a side note here to honor some people who are some of my elders. Because in starting ABC, I went to 2 of my favorite elders, both of whom have passed. The famous botanist Jim Duke, James A. Duke, ethnobotanist who at that time was the leading medicinal plant expert in the entire U.S. government. He was in charge of medicinal plant research, such as it was at the United States Department of Agriculture. And the world famous Professor Norman R. Farnsworth, who's one of the great professors of pharmacognosy in the world at the University of Illinois at Chicago at the College of Pharmacy there. They helped me start ABC, and the three of us were the first three board members of ABC on November 1st, 1988. And about 4 years later, the fourth board member joined us, Professor Vero E. Tyler, professor of pharmacognosy at Purdue University and vice president of the university for 5 years. He was provost. And the day after he retired from the university, he joined the board of ABC. So ABC was founded not just by myself, but with the help and the goodwill and the door-opening capacity of these three silver-haired gentlemen who were my elders and my mentors in the area of ethnobotany and pharmacognosy, two of the major sciences that underpin the herbal medicine movement.
Excellent. Well, Mark, before you begin to tell us about James Duke and also Stephen Foster, could you give us a little context on the meaning of pharmacognosy and ethnobotany and who's who in our discussion tonight?
Certainly. And just one minor point here. Actually, I started Herbalgram in 1983. With Rob McCaleb who worked at the laboratories at the time of Celestial Seasonings. And for 5 years, we published it for the Herb Research Foundation, which he and I started and he ran, and the American Herbal Products Association, which I was a co-founder, one of the founding board members. And APA right now, by the way, shout out to APA, the American Herbal Products Association, probably the leading herbal trade association in the world, or one of them anyway. APA is 40 years old this year in 2022. So it was 1982. We started Herbalgram as a newsletter because back then we didn't have internet. We didn't have email. It was print stuff out and send it in the mail. So the two questions. So we started Herbalgram in 83 and we started the American Botanical Council in 88 in order to take Herbalgram as a small newsletter and turn it into a journal magazine style, kind of like Scientific American. That was our vision. That was our goal. Scientific American is where we wanted to go. That look, where things were beautiful. There's color. There's graphics. Everything is correct, accurate. No typos or hardly any typos. and that's always been our, we had our best. I think our best compliment once a couple of years ago. Somebody sent us a check in the mail at Christmas time, and they said, my wife and I, we recycle all of our magazines except for two, National Geographic and Herbalgram. Okay, thank you so much for that. That was I can quit now. That's over. I got mentioned. Our publication got mentioned in the same breath with National Geographic. Okay, we've done it. Not really. We haven't done it. It's an uphill always. So what are we talking about when we say ethnobotany and pharmacognosy? Ethnobotany is the scientific study of how indigenous cultures utilize the plants in their area and or the plants that they trade for with other cultures that are not growing in their area, and how they use these plants for food, for fiber, for shelter, for color, for fragrance, for magic, ritual, and medicine. And it's particularly the medicinal uses that interested me and has interested me all these years. That's ethnobotany. Pharmacognosy is an original science in the pharmaceutical and pharmacy profession. Pharmacognosis, study of drugs. Pharmacognosy is the study of drugs that come from natural sources, usually plants, but they can also include animals. And it used to be a required course in every college of pharmacy in the United States until the 1970s or 1980s. And it got replaced in many schools of pharmacy by medicinal chemistry. They used to call it weeds and seeds, the pharmacognosy course, because you studied the plants that are classic sources of drugs that are derived from plants. Reserpine, which was a blood pressure lowering drug, or caffeine, or cocaine, which was used in the 1890s and is still used as a topical anesthetic from coca leaf. And there's dozens, like 1980, Professor Farnsworth, who was mentioned in the video earlier at the University of Illinois, did a study for the World Health Organization called Medicinal Plants and Therapy was the name of the article. And the medicinal plants and therapy, they listed 119 classic drugs used in medicine and pharmacy that are derived from plants. And 74% of those modern drugs, modern, some of them a couple hundred years old, since they've been using them from plants, 74% of those, the use of those drugs today are based on the same use that the plants they're derived from were used in traditional historical medicine. So there's a great correlation there. And that's why the search for new drugs often is based on looking at traditional societies and their medicines and trying to find active compounds that can be isolated, purified, sometimes chemically modified to increase the activity or reduce the toxicity to make a pharmaceutical drug. Matter of fact, I need to point out that, as I used to say in my pharmacy classes and lectures to doctors and pharmacists, a fact that many of them still don't know, they don't learn today, the word drug itself derives from an old Dutch word droog, which means to dry, because they used to dry the plants and set them aside for use as medicine. The word drought has the same origin. So the whole concept, the whole meaning originally for drug was a dried plant that was medicinal. So, hope that answers your question.
Cool. So tell us, when did you first get acquainted then with James Duke, and tell us of some of his adventures, because we know of a little bit of that in your video, but we'd like to hear more. He obviously was a scientist, he worked for USDA, but he was very unusual in going to the people in their own native lands. And tell us a little bit about how that worked out and how it kind of brought things to the attention of, say, the American public.
Okay, happy to do that. It's always an honor to talk about the people who taught you and who my teachers. And Jim was, and many people can claim to be mentored by Jim Duke. I'm only one of many people who have that honor, and for which I'm grateful. Jim, first of all, I met him at 1977 at the University of California, Santa Cruz, at the first Herb Trade Association, which was a small herb trade association, an industry association that we started back in 1976. In 1977, we had this conference, this symposium, where the first time where some of the hippie herbalists in the herbal industry, such as it was, Celestial Seasonings, these different herb companies, got together with these scientists. And I got to give a shout out to Dr. Paul Lee, because it was he that came. He was the executive director at the time of the Herb Trade Association. He was a philosopher at the university, professor of philosophy at the University at California, Santa Cruz. And he's the first one who brought together the scientific academic community, people that were doing legitimate research and education on scientific-based herbs, ethnobotany, and pharmacognosy with the emerging nascent herbal industry leaders at that time. So I met Jim that way. We struck up a friendship because he was very easygoing fella, originally from Alabama, and grew up in North Carolina. And as you can see in one of the couple of photos that you showed, standing there barefooted in the Amazon jungle with just a pair of shorts on and a t-shirt. That's all he. Yeah, we used to say about Jim, you could take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. He would walk barefoot on these paths in the Amazon jungle, where the rest of us, the herbalists, we had our hiking boots from REI or wherever, no plug intended there, but we had our hiking boots and all of our equipment for the big hike in our backpacks, and Jim just had a little satchel and was walking barefoot, with an old pair of canvas rubber sole shoes that he would keep in his bag if he took them out at all. I'm astonished he didn't step on all kinds of stickers and thorns, but he just did it because he was at home in the jungle, at home in the forest. He was a plant person. He could look out at the plants and recognize most of the plants that were out there, and just a few of them that he didn't know would stand out to him and he would want to
Right.
try to figure out and botanize and figure out how to figure out the taxonomy. Jim, by the way, originally was a music major, so that tells you something. You know, if you believe in this right brain, left brain split, you know, he was a person who was really um, interested in the right in music and art, and he used to write herbal songs and play herbal songs, and he played guitar with a group
Yeah.
of friends up in Howard County, northwest of or northeast of Washington D.C. and the suburbs. And he wrote a song on ginseng, and they're precious. And he came out with a record or a tape of his song herbal songs called Herb Album, or you could pronounce it Herbal Bum. It's spelled the same way. And another anecdote about Jim was he was a wordsmith. He was always coming up with all kinds of twists and words and poetry. They sounded like poetry, and he would write in a stream of consciousness. And one of his very first books that he ever published was when he was working for the USD or the U.S. Army, I think, in Panama. And I don't think it was U.S. government. I'm sure the Army or whatever. And he came out with a compilation of Spanish swear words that he learned in Panama, and the name of the book is Lewd Latin Lexicon. That's a Jim Dukeism.
He's a character.
But he also was very passionate about giving herbs their chance, giving herbs some respect, giving them an opportunity. He wrote an article in Herbalgram back in the middle 1980s called something like High Pharmaceutical Prices Require Government Funding for Herbal Research. And he said, listen, it costs $50 million to get a new drug approved at that time. It's closer to like $500 million now. So it's like, that's what it costs, according to the Pharmaceutical Research Manufacturers Association, I think it's called, to get a drug developed and through the approval process at FDA, and it takes years and all that. Half a billion dollars or so. Back then, when Jim was writing for us, it was $50 million. You know, pocket change by today's standards, but still, it's a lot of money. And he believed that every time they did a clinical trial on testing the potential experimental drug, the synthetic drug made from some synthetic chemicals or maybe from a natural source, they should automatically test it not just against a placebo, but there should be a third arm, and it should be tested against the most promising herbal alternative, if there is one, just to see how the herb might work in that same clinical setting. That was his model that he proposed close to 40 years ago.
Now, it occurs to me, is there an example of where Dr. Duke kind of endorsed something from obscurity to mainstreaming its safety and efficacy? Is there any examples that you can think of that?
He was a big believer and supporter in early days of the Taxol. You know, Taxol is a drug used for breast cancer, I believe, and several other types of cancers that originally came from the leaves of the North Pacific yew tree, the YEW yew tree. And it takes a lot of yew tree to extract to get, you know, a little bit of Taxol pure compound, but that's what they did until they found other ways to develop it chemically, you know, using natural sources, etc. But he was a big believer in Taxol and supported it because it made a lot of sense. The early research did. So, but backing up from that, I'll tell you a little story about Jim that's interesting as part of his vita from cancer point of view. One of Jim's biggest jobs for the United States Department of Agriculture was working with the National Cancer Institute. And at that time, the National Cancer Institute had this compilation of herbs that was done by a man named Jonathan Hartwell. And Hartwell had published these articles that got compiled into a book called Plants Against Cancer or Plants for Cancer, something like that. And what he did is he scrupulously collected and curated all this information from around the world on any folk or ethnobotanical reputation that a plant had for use externally or internally as a tea or whatever for some kind of cancer. Even it had no science, but it was folk medicine. It had a reputation. And the National Cancer Institute was trying to find, they were going to screen these plants to look for compounds and then run them through these different pharmacological tests to see if any of those compounds that could get hits, they call it, compounds that could have anti-tumor properties. So Jim Duke went around the world collecting samples of those plants listed in Hartwell's huge inventory of plants that have historically and traditionally been used for cancer, even though there may not be any scientific data at that time. We're talking 1960s here.
Wow.
1950s. So that was an incredible thing, because that's how Jim got to see the world, under the U.S. taxpayers' expense, working for the National Cancer Institute and the USDA.
What was Jim's favorite herbs, like on an everyday basis or weekly basis? Did anything pop to mind?
Well, peppermint was one of his favorites, because he would always, talk about creme de menthe. Creme de menthe which is a wonderful liqueur. He was always talking about using creme de menthe, but he had a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, he would find all kinds of herbs that are used as spices. He would use anything and everything. Jim was very eclectic. He would borrow from here and borrow from there and use all kinds of stuff and make chemical cocktails. As a matter of fact, Jim was one of the people that turned me on, and a lot of other people, onto the concept that when you're making an herbal tea, when you're making coffee, you're making a chemical cocktail from a plant, extracting it with using water if you're making a tea, or later on if you're using alcohol. And this whole idea of the synergy of all these chemicals that are available if they're water soluble into a tea was something that Jim used to love to talk about. He had, I don't know, several hundred or more herbs in his garden. He had a 6-acre place in Fulton, Maryland, called Herbal Vineyards.
Huh.
That's, always looking for the right word.
Yeah.
And Jim was the kind of guy that would stop and put almost anything in his mouth and taste it just to see what it was like. Just because he loved plants, and he was if he cut, he would bleed green. And he had chlorophyll in his brains.
Well, he had a couple in a series of books referred to as Green Pharmacy, which I think is talk about coining, right? If he had anything to do with that anyway, a great concept. And do you think that his steady influence, helped Americans be more open to that as kind of first tier exploration on their health concerns? Do you think?
Absolutely. And by the way, Green Pharmacy was spelled with an F, pharmacy, right?
Right.
And he would also, he had a database at the USDA that he called Father Nature's Pharmacy, by the way. So that was like a big database, and he would compile everything he could find. He wrote a book that was published by Rodale Press. And Rodale had huge circulation, as we know, because of Organic Farming and Gardening and Prevention Magazine. I mean, they just really had a huge mailing list of probably several millions. And I think they probably sold, I'm guessing, because it's hard for me to remember at this point, maybe 500,000 copies of his book. I hope that's not too far off.
That sounds about right.
Oh. But in doing that, he reached a lot of people that way, to demystify herbal medicine to people and make it more accessible. So to answer your question, yes, he was a great promoter of the whole idea of herbal medicine and the herbal renaissance, because he was coming from a scientific point of view. At the same time, he was able to communicate in a very down-home, folksy, accessible manner. People loved Jim. He had a wonderful personality. He had that Alabama drawl.
Yeah,
and he was just a real fun guy. He had no pretense. He was inherently and innately humble person, and a great human being.
Well, before we move to Stephen Foster, any other thoughts on Dr. Duke that you want to share?
Well, there's so much to say. I mean, we would be down in the Amazon, I was maybe on 8 or 10 trips with him in the Amazon, Belize, Costa Rica, South Africa, we Kenya, and we would take pharmacists. We had a tour. We started a series of tours in 1994 called Pharmacy from the Rainforest, and we specialized in inviting pharmacists. Physicians were invited as well for continuing education credit, so pharmacists and doctors could get 12 hours credit for coming on a trip with us to the Amazon and to Machu Picchu up in the Peruvian Andes. And Jim would just start talking about this plant or that plant and tell us what drug was coming out of it. One of his favorite was curare, the vine in South America that they use. They use the extract of they take the curare and they use it in the blowguns, the dart poison, because they'll shoot it out of sloth through a blowgun, and that curare actually makes the animal. It affects the nervous system, and they can't hold on. It's a nerve relaxant, and the nerves let go, forces the muscles to let go, and the sloths fall out of the trees, and the natives come and take it and actually make dinner out of it. They made a drug out of it called D-tubocararine. It's one of Jim's favorite stories of many. D-tubocararine is the actual name of this drug that they used to use in pre-surgical muscle relaxants so they could cut through abdominal muscles more easily in abdominal surgery. But the name D-tubocararine, the tubo comes from the fact that it was shot through arrows through these blowgun tubes.
That was featured in an episode of MASH, using that in the Korean War, because it helped to finish the surgery without completely paralyzing somebody. So good story. Good story. Yeah. So what are your thoughts about your friend and colleague, Stephen Foster?
It's only been as of February of 2022 that we're having this conversation. Stephen's only been past 3 weeks.
I see.
And it was sudden. We didn't expect it. Nobody did. And I just talked to him on a Friday afternoon, and we were going to talk again later in the weekend, as we often do. And he passed either Friday night or Saturday sometime. So within a few hours after I talked to him or whatever, I think his daughter was one of the last person to talk to him. She was at the house when he drove up when I was talking to him. Stephen Foster was an amazing, incredible human being. He had almost a photographic memory for herbal literature. He never went to college. He had a high school education. After high school, he went to work at the Shaker Herb Farm in Sabbath Day Lake, Maine, which I think was started in the late 1700s, where the Shakers grew herbs and then shipped them out all over. They were the first herbal mail order business, the Shaker herbs. And Stephen learned how to grow herbs and cultivate herbs and process the herbs from the Shakers. This very conservative group of people that are very close to the land and very close to the earth. Stephen was a world-class photographer. He was a master of capturing light, because photography is in essence about light. You're capturing light on formerly a film and now on a computer chip. And Stephen used to schlep around this bag with all these heavy Nikon cameras and stuff. We'd go through the jungle, he'd be sweating, and it's like the humidity was like 80% or whatever, and it's
right,
100 degrees, and he'd schlep all this up. Nowadays, when he would go down there, he'd take his his iPhone 13 Pro or whatever, and he showed people how they could take excellent photography using an iPhone. Or if you happen to be a what's the other phone called? I forget.
The Androids and
Android.
all.
I'm sorry. I forget. I'm a Mac person, obviously.
Yeah, no problem.
No plug intended. So Stephen and his photography has appeared on 59 covers of Herbalgram, and every issue of Herbalgram since issue number 24, and we're about to send issue number 133 to the printer, and we're a quarterly. So it just tells you, for the last 30 some odd years, almost every issue of Herbalgram has had, and every issue has had a Stephen Foster photo or 10 Stephen Foster photos or whatever. He was
Yes.
great. And his photos have appeared in books and in magazines and in corporate communications and advertising. And it's amazing that he really could get in close on photos. Stephen used to take photographs, and he would make a distinction between a photograph and a snapshot. And the term snapshot was not something that he would say respectfully at all.
Uh-huh.
And he would look at some magazines or whatever books, and first thing you do is critique if they had photography in it.
Right.
Critique the photography is very, the quality of it was often substandard.
Well, one thing I've noticed over the years in Herbalgram online and in print is you really get captivated. You can fall in love with an herb just by its image, because some of them are extremely colorful. I mean, it gives them a personality, and he was superb at capturing that. And it makes even something rudimentary just come alive if you haven't had a chance to see it in the field or when it was at its best in bloom or whatever.
This weekend I was writing a tribute to Stephen that's going to be published in my Dear Reader column in Herbalgram, and I was kind of writing in a stream of consciousness, still going through a grief process, obviously, and I wrote that Stephen was really excellent at communicating the beauty and benefits of herbs. And I stopped, and I normally would have written the benefits and the beauty of herbs, because the benefits is something that ABC focuses on, because we not only focus on the rich and honoring the rich tradition from ethnobotany and traditional medicine, but we focus on the science that supports a lot of those benefits that people use them for. But I said beauty before benefits with Stephen, and I was about to change it and put benefits first, because that's kind of how the ABC scientific mission, research and educational mission. And I stopped and I said, no, it'll stay, because that's what it was about for Stephen. Certainly he wrote extensively and copiously. He authored or co-authored 21 books in his career. But he also took several 100,000 photographs, 150,000, something like that. And many of them are multiple photographs on the same herb, and he has them categorized by the proper Latin name, the scientific Latin binomial. But his legacy, I think it's too early to tell, but I think that it's very possible that his legacy may be less in what he wrote and more in what he captured on film and on a digital chip. The beauty of the botanical. So I left it in that order: the beauty and the benefits, because with Stephen, he was the one that at least allowed us with his photography and was very liberal in making it available to us, so that we can show people that with this research article, we're showing you 4-color photography of these plants, courtesy of the eye of Stephen and the camera from Stephen Foster.
Well, that brings to mind your right-left brain comment for sure. That's kind of the polarized presentation of Herbalgram. He enhanced that and practically created it. I think that many you mentioned about the consumers' communication to you about comparing to National Geographic, and that's got to be because of Stephen. So
absolutely, and yes, and thank you, Jerry, because I missed that. But yes, I would definitely, if anybody's going to make a connection to ABC and call it the National Geographic of Herbs or the Scientific American of Herbs, aside from the extensive and time consuming peer review process that we go through, like a scientific journal, we publish like no other publication probably in the world. They were scientifically referenced, and we have an article going to print this next week that's got 145 references. But the fact is, it's got the color photography, and most of which comes from Stephen. And it's about the beauty and the morphology, the shape, the gorgeous. I'm just sorry that we can't, publish these the magazines still in print in some kind of smell fragrance
Right.
printing, where you can
Yeah.
smell these plants as well and touch them. But we get as close as we can get, other than 3D with Stephen's photography.
Well, that's wonderful stories that you told about him. And before we close our episode, I know that some people less academically inclined might see American Herb Council as, like, well, what have you
Botanical.
done for me lately? And I wanted just to, if you could briefly explain BAP, which I think is a tremendous program, especially in the days of online purchasing from who knows what brand. Could you tell us briefly how that's working and how ABC is behind it?
Okay, the BAP is BAPP, the acronym for the Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program. It's a consortium of the American Botanical Council, which we're a nonprofit, the nonprofit American Herbal Pharmacopoeia, our good friend Roy Upton, as well as the National Center for Natural Products Research at the University of Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi, the leading analytical laboratory, FDA-funded Center of Excellence for testing herbal materials and coming up with testing methodologies for the laboratory. And what we've done in 11 years now with the Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program, BAP, is look at all the herbs that so far, a lot of the herbs that are either suspected or rumored to be adulterated in the marketplace internationally. Adulterated meaning they're calling it A, but it's really B. Or they're saying it's A, but it's got a lot of cheaper B in it, but that's not on the label. Adulteration is the switching or dilution of something with an unconcealed, unlabeled, non-transparent, cheaper item, or the removal of valuable compounds from something and selling it as if it was the real thing. There's a lot of way that the fraudsters adulterate. These people are criminals, and because people are taking herbal preparations for their health. It's not just because they taste good because it's a tea or something, especially if it's a capsule or a tablet. You can't taste it. People are taking these products because they believe that they're going to get some health benefit from it. And they may believe it for a number of reasons, because their mother told them to take it, their grandmother gave it to them, they read about a clinical study in a magazine or saw it online. Lots of different reasons. But the fact of the matter is, if what they think they're taking isn't authentic, which by law it should be, it has to be, then they're not going to get the benefit. And so what we've been doing for 11 years, and we have published 71 peer-reviewed publications thus far to educate industry stakeholders and others about what herbs are being sold as frauds. And I'm not saying all of them, but ginkgo, there's fraudulent ginkgo out there. Bilberry, there's fraudulent bilberry out there. Turmeric, there's fraudulent turmeric out there. Not all of it, of course not, hopefully. And I must say, there are many high-quality companies with really responsible, ethical, committed management who really care about the health and welfare of their customers and who are clearly following the law and properly testing and purchasing high-quality raw material that they put in their products. The problem is there's a rotten apple in the barrel over here and a rotten apple in the barrel over there, and there's lots of barrels.
Well, Officer Blumenthal, I'm glad you're policing those things, because it gives a bad name when people try something and it's not authentic. So to me, the takeaway is, and I have a somewhat of a bias, but buy from a brand that can trust and that brags about their programs for analysis and authenticity, because a powder could be lots of things. And so thank you for doing that. And please keep up the good work. We hope to see you again to talk more about the renaissance of herbs and other herbal pioneers. And Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jerry, for including me in this series. And I've enjoyed the conversation, and I really enjoyed the opportunity to honor my good friends Jim Duke and Stephen Foster. So thanks for allowing me to do that.
You're welcome. And to our audience, please stay tuned for the link and share it with your friends, and consider supporting the Health Pioneer program at the links provided. Have a great evening. We'll see you soon.